If you have searched for gardening tips online, you have probably come across video claiming that 1 spoon of cinnamon can transfer your plants. Some say it makes plants grow faster, some say it saves dying plants. Some even claim it works better than expensive plant products. I've seen videos where a struggling plant suddenly becomes lush and full just by adding cinnamon. So, how much of that is true? Over the last few years, cinnamon has quietly become one of the few kitchen ingredients that has earned a permanent place with my gardening tools, not because I think it's magical, but because I have found a few situations where it has genuinely been useful. At the same time, I have also come across a lot of claims that simply don't match what I have seen in my own garden. So instead of repeating what the internet says, I thought I would share how I personally use cinnamon on my houseplants, what has worked for me, and one popular use that I don't rely on at all. By the end of this video, you will know the 5 times I reach for cinnamon and the one situation where I never use it. So, let's start with the very first reason, and it's probably the one that made cinnamon a permanent part of my gardening routine. Every time we prune a plant, we are doing something that's good for it. We are encouraging new growth, removing damaged stems, or simply giving the plant a better shape. But there's one thing we often forget. Every cut we make is also a fresh wound, and until that wound dries and heals, it's more vulnerable to fungal problems, especially if you live in a place that's warm and humid like I do. Whenever I prune my pothos, philodendrons, syngoniums, or any other houseplant, I almost always keep a small bowl of cinnamon nearby. As soon as I finish pruning, I take just tiny pinch and lightly dust it over the fresh cut. Not a thick layer, just enough to cover the cut surface. It takes only a few seconds, but over time it has become such a natural part of my routine that I almost do it without thinking. Does cinnamon magically heal the plant? No. The plant heals itself. What cinnamon can do is help protect that fresh cut while it begins to dry and callus. That's the reason I use it, especially during the rainy season or when the weather is hot and humid, because that's when fungal problems are more common. But pruning isn't the only reason I keep cinnamon in my gardening supplies. The next use is the one people ask me about the most. Can cinnamon really replace rooting hormone when you are propagating plants? Let's find out. So, can cinnamon really replace rooting hormone? This is probably the question I ask the most whenever I mention using cinnamon. And my answer is, it depends on what you expect it to do. If you are expecting cinnamon to work like a commercial rooting hormone and suddenly make roots appear much faster, that's probably asking too much. But if you are using it as a simple way to protect a fresh cutting while it begins developing roots, then it has been a useful addition to my propagation routine. Whenever I take cuttings from plants like pothos or any other plants, I first make a clean cut using sterilized scissors. Then I leave the cutting for a minute or two, take just a tiny pinch of cinnamon and lightly coat the cut end. That's all. After that, I place the cutting in water, sphagnum moss, leca, or directly into the propagation mix depending on the plant. I have propagated plenty of plants without cinnamon too, and they have rooted just fine. So I don't think cinnamon is a magic ingredient that every cutting must have. But because it's inexpensive, already sitting in my kitchen and has become part of my routine, I continue using it. For me, it's one of those small steps that gives a fresh cutting a cleaner start. One thing I would suggest is not using too much. A very light dusting is enough. You don't need to bury the cutting in cinnamon. Sometimes less really is more. But what if a plant is already in trouble? Let's say you'll pull a plant out of its pot, the roots are black, soft, and starting to smell. Can cinnamon save it? This is another claim you'll see all over the internet. Here's how I deal with root rot. Whenever I suspect root rot, the first thing I do is remove the plant from the pot and gently wash away the old soil. Only then can I clearly see which roots are healthy and which ones have started rotting. Healthy roots usually feel firm, and rotten roots are soft, mushy, dark, and often pull apart very easily. Those damaged roots need to go. I trim every rotten root using clean, sterilized scissors until only healthy tissue is left. At this point, some gardeners soak the roots in different fungicide solutions. What I usually do is much simpler. After trimming the damaged roots, I let the healthy roots dry for a short while. Then I slightly dust the freshly cut root ends with cinnamon before repotting the plant into fresh, well-draining soil. This is an extra step I personally like to take because those freshly cut roots are now exposed, just like a freshly pruned stem. But there's one thing that's really important to understand. Cinnamon doesn't cure root rot if the plant goes back into heavy, soggy soil or continues to be overwatered. The rot will simply come back. The biggest reason plants recover from root rot is because you have removed the infected roots, improved the soil, and corrected the watering problem. The next reason I started using cinnamon had nothing to do with pruning or propagation. It started because of ants. A few years ago, I noticed tiny piles of soil appearing in some of my pots. At first, I couldn't understand what was happening. Then one day I looked closely and realized ants had started making little nests inside the pots. If you have dealt with this before, you know how annoying it can be. While looking for different solutions, I came across gardeners who recommend cinnamon because ants doesn't seem to like its strong smell. So I thought, why not give it a try? I lightly sprinkled a little cinnamon around the rim of the pot and over the area where the ants were most active. Did every ant disappear overnight? No, but I did notice that the activity reduced and some of those pots were left alone after that. Since then, if I see ants beginning to settle in a pot, cinnamon is one of the first things I try. There's one thing to remember though, if ants keep coming back again and again, it's worth checking the plant carefully. Sometimes the ants aren't interested in your soil at all. They are visiting because aphids, mealybugs, or scale insects are producing a sweet liquid called honeydew, and the ants are basically farming those pests. So if you only chase away the ants without dealing with the insects, the problem usually comes back. That's why I always recommend finding the real reason before trying any natural remedy. Now let's talk about another situation where cinnamon can be surprisingly useful. Have you ever noticed a white fuzzy layer growing on the surface of your potting mix? It usually appears when the soil stays wet for too long. The weather is humid or air circulation isn't great. The first time I saw it, I thought something was seriously wrong with my plant. Thankfully, it's often just surface mold. When that happens, I scrape away the affected top layer of soil, improve airflow, and let the soil dry a little more between watering. Sometimes, I'll also dust a very light layer of cinnamon over the fresh surface. Again, I don't expect cinnamon to solve the whole problem. The real solution is fixing whatever caused the mold in the first place. Cinnamon is simply the extra step that may help discourage growing mold. The same idea is why many gardeners also use a tiny amount of cinnamon when starting seeds. Young seedlings can sometimes collapse because of a fungal disease called damping off. A light dusting on the growing medium may help reduce fungal growth around the seedlings. I've seen many gardeners use this method successfully, although I still believe that good airflow, clean seed trays, and proper waterings are even more important. So far, we have talked about the situations where cinnamon has become part of my gardening routine. But here's something that might surprise you. There's one claim about cinnamon that I see repeated everywhere, and it's one I don't rely on anymore. Before you start sprinkling cinnamon or every plant you own, let's clear up a few myths that can easily lead to disappointment. Now let's talk about the one claim I see more than any other. That cinnamon is some kind of miracle powder that can fix almost every plant problem. If you have spent any time on social media, you have probably seen videos where someone sprinkles cinnamon into a pot and suddenly the plant becomes greener, bushier, flowers everywhere, or a dying plant looks completely healthy within days. I wish gardening worked that way. It would make life a lot easier. But after growing houseplants for some years, I have learned that there's no single ingredient that can replace good plant care. If a plant isn't getting enough light, if it's sitting in heavy waterlogged soil, if it's being overwatered every few days, or it's suffering from pests, no amount of cinnamon is going to solve those problems. That's why I don't use cinnamon as a fertilizer. I don't mix it into every pot just because I saw someone recommend it online. And I don't expect dramatic results overnight. For me, cinnamon is simply a helpful tool just like clean pruning scissors, a well draining potting mix, or a good watering routine. Each one plays its own role. None of them can do everything. And that's probably the biggest lesson gardening has taught me over the years. Small habits repeated consistently make much bigger difference than searching for one magical solution. So if you're wondering where I personally use cinnamon, here's a quick recap. After pruning stems to lightly protect the fresh cuts. On fresh cuttings before propagation, after trimming healthy roots while dealing with root rot before repotting, around pots when ants start becoming a problem, on the soil surface if I notice mold, along with improving airflow and watering. And for seed trays, a light dusting can also be useful because many gardeners use it to help reduce fungal problems like damping off. Those are the situations where cinnamon has earned a permanent place in my gardening supplies, not because it's magical, but because it's simple, affordable, and easy to keep on hand. Now, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever used cinnamon on your plants? Did it work for you? Or have you discovered another natural gardening trick that's become part of your routine? Share your experience in the comments because some of the best gardening tips I have learned over the years have come from fellow plant lovers. And if you enjoy practical gardening advice that's based on real experience, not internet myths, consider subscribing to Her Green Space. Every week, I share simple tips to help you grow healthier houseplants without wasting money on things you don't need. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cinnamon is just one small part of that entire recovery process.